Hi guys, I'm in a little bit of a different location today. I'm outside, so hopefully my dogs don't start barking. If they do, I apologize. It is time for chapters 29 and 30 in Dolls of War. So remember, they are at the beach. She with Aunt Ida and Uncle Emery. So here we go. A perfect globe of heavy, translucent, blue-tinted glass lay almost covered in driftwood and seaweed. Macy picked it out, tossing aside a long, hollow length of kelp. It was hard to believe that this beautiful float had traveled all the way across the ocean after holding up a fishing net somewhere far away, maybe even Japan. Drop it! Uncle Emery's shout rang from the dune. He skidded down the steep bank, spraying sand to either side before landing near Macy. Drop that thing before it explodes in your hands. It's just a glass float. You can't see into that thing, not clearly. There could be a bomb inside, just waiting to bump up against one of our ships and blow it sky high. He snatched it from her and hurled it onto a bank of jagged rocks, holding tide pools at the waterline. Macy gasped, "Don't!" She was too late. Shattered glass flew. Macy couldn't help thinking of Miss Tokyo. The doll wasn't made of glass, but she could be damaged. Uncle Emery could destroy her like the float. If the float had held a bomb, they'd have both been dangerously close. But there were only heavy shards of glass on the wet sand and rock. Uncle Emery looked pleased. "That's that. Did you have something to show me?" He admired the agate, but Macy's pleasure in the stone had faded. Uncle Emery worried too much. There hadn't been a bomb in that float. Maybe there weren't any submarines in the water. Uncle Emery and Aunt Ida should allow her to play on the beach every nice day. There was no point asking to come to the beach alone. She kicked her way toward Aunt Ida. Oh, there's an ant on me, sorry. She kicked her way toward Aunt Ida through the silvered driftwood and glossy green kelp along the wave slope. Another mass of long blade-like leaves curled just ahead. Macy put all her frustration into kicking the mass apart. Her foot hit something that rolled. Rosy glass glinted beneath the green lengths. Another float? Macy glanced toward the dune where Uncle Emery was scanning the waves again. Quickly, she knelt and pushed the seaweed clear. The float was a perfect, heavy globe of rose-tinted glass. She lifted it to peer into the center. No bomb inside. Of course not. It was just a float, washed free of a fisherman's net. But what a pretty one. She had to save it. But how could she? Uncle Emery would smash it as quickly as he'd smashed the more common blue float. She grabbed the nearby length of driftwood and used it to poke innocently at the sand with one hand while snuggling the rosy float close to her body on the side away from Uncle Emery. Logs had washed down from somewhere and been storm-tossed and sun-bleached on the higher part of the beach. Macy walked to wave-piled drift near the first rise of the dunes. Kneeling on the far side of the biggest log, she dug a nest of soft sand. Miss Tokyo would love to see the rosy color, she told herself as she arranged driftwood over the glass, hiding it. Satisfied that no one would see it, she sat back on her heels. How could she keep the float safe or even come back for it when she wasn't allowed to come to the beach alone? That night, as she lay pressed to the space between the wall and the bed, she told Miss Tokyo about the shattered float and the hidden one. "We have to keep you secret, so don't make a sound." That made her giggle, because of course she made all of the sounds for Miss Tokyo. Why was she warning the doll to keep quiet? And yet, when she didn't talk for the doll, she could feel words pressing inside her that Miss Tokyo would say if she could talk. "Did I tell you about the scrap collection? I haven't had time to gather Mr. Oaks' cans yet, but luckily his nephew hasn't come." "Maybe he won't come, Macy-chan," she made the doll answer, knowing the hope was her own. "I only had the cans Aunt Ida gave me when we turned them in after school on Friday. The other girls had more, but when I added mine, we were ahead of the boys, so everyone was happy." "They'll be happier when you take in Mr. Oaks' cans," the doll answered in her high voice. Macy grinned, thinking Miss Tokyo was right, and looking forward to next Saturday, when she would take in the baby buggy filled with tin cans and surprise them all. The week passed quickly. Macy had hoped to run back to the dune for the float on her way home from school, but Linda from her class lived farther down the highway and walked with her each day. There was no reason to keep the float a secret from Linda, except that Linda might go after it herself. "It's mine," Macy told herself silently, "and it's in danger." During breakfast on Saturday morning, static blared from the shortwave radio as usual, while Uncle Emery twisted the dials. Suddenly, a woman's voice came through, startling them all. "Listen!" Uncle Emery exclaimed as an announcer identified the station. "I've tuned in Japan." "So, Soldier Joe," the young woman said in accented English through a blur of static, "do you remember dolls from America? Maybe your big sisters saved money to buy one. Maybe your mother made clothes for a doll. This was 15 years ago, Joe. You and your fellow soldiers were little boys then. Do you remember? In a low voice, Macy said, "She's talking about friendship dolls." "Your sisters wrote sweet letters, Joe," the woman said as the static faded. "The letters asked little girls in Japan to be kind to the dolls and love them." Aunt Ida said, "She's aiming her talk at our soldiers, isn't she? The way that awful Tokyo Rose does with her broadcasts. Why is she talking about dolls?" "All the way from Japan and coming in clear as can be." Uncle Emery beamed at his radio as if he'd built it from scratch, and it was suddenly performing properly. Macy leaned closer to hear the Japanese woman's broadcast. "Do you wonder what happened to those sweet dollies, Joe? We gave them parties when they came. It's sad, though, Joe. Our great General Tojo says they're symbols of the enemy. So sad. No more parties." Macy felt her eyes getting wide. All those dolls, more than 12,000 of them, were seen as enemies in Japan, just the way Miss Tokyo was seen as an enemy in Stanby. "Our soldiers treated the dolls the way they will treat you, Joe," the woman's voice continued through new static. "They smashed their heads with rifle butts. Bam, bam, bam. And our little children, they watched and clapped their hands." "No," Macy exclaimed. "Oh, no." "My land," Aunt Ida said with a gasp. "I don't believe they clapped," Macy said. "They're just children. They wouldn't clap when dolls were smashed. They wouldn't." "Our countries are at war," Uncle Emery said, as if Macy might have forgotten even for a minute. "You got to expect things like that." Aunt Ida said, "The Japanese sent some dolls to children here in return." Then her mouth clamped tight as if she just remembered that Macy was here because she cared too much for one of those big Japanese dolls. "I'd like to put a bullet through any doll they sent," Uncle Emery said. "We don't want their trash here any more than they want dolls from us." Macy saw him catch an anxious look from Aunt Ida. When he turned to Macy, he looked the way the pastor at home looked when he was about to make an important point. "Pearl Harbor brought our country together against the enemy. We won't stand for anybody attacking us." He waited as if he expected an answer. Macy could only think of little children watching soldiers smash the American dolls. She would never believe that those children had clapped their hands. Uncle Emery's voice roughened. "That's why you're collecting scrap. Just don't forget the Victory Garden. Every bit of food we grow for ourselves means food we don't have to buy, and that leaves more canned goods available for our soldiers. And more ration coupons saved," Aunt Ida added. Macy nodded and pushed away her bowl. Aunt Ida said, "Before you start on the Victory Garden, dear, will you help me take the sheets off the beds so I can get them in the wash?" Fresh horror swept through Macy. Aunt Ida was going to take the sheets off the beds. She might pull the beds away from the wall. She would see Miss Tokyo, and then she would tell Uncle Emery, and he would destroy the Japanese doll. "I'll bring my sheets downstairs," she said quickly. "You do that, dear. I want to sweep behind and under the beds, and it's easier when the coverings are off." The rice puffs Macy had eaten felt like they were exploding all over again inside her stomach. She gulped down a last spoonful because the Farrells didn't approve of waste and pushed to her feet. "I'll get my sheets right now. I want to get started collecting cans as soon as I can." She raced up the stairs without waiting for an answer. She had to get Miss Tokyo away. Where could she hide the doll? It didn't matter. She would find a place. First, she had to get Miss Tokyo out of the house. She pictured the doll standing against a target, maybe with a blindfold over her eyes, while Uncle Emery aimed his rifle. By the time she reached the top of the stairs, she was gasping for breath. She grabbed the door frame, swung around it, and paused, trying to hear over the pounding in her ears. Downstairs, Aunt Ida hummed as she walked into the big bedroom on the first floor. Macy rushed to her bed, dropped to her knees, and squirmed beneath. She grabbed Miss Tokyo and backed out, pulling the doll with her. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "We have to get you away, right now." The blanket had fallen from the doll's face. Macy paused to look at her, seeing as if, for the first time, the doll's gentle eyes and sweet hint of a smile. "Mama," she whispered into the air, "you don't think the children clapped, do you?" She couldn't hear Mama answer or even answer for her in the high voice they always gave the doll. Why wasn't Mama answering? Maybe Mama didn't think Macy could get Miss Tokyo to safety. "I promised," she said. "I promised Mama and Hap. I'll save you, Miss Tokyo. I promised to save you from them." She heard tears in the voice she gave the doll as she answered shakily. "Will you save me for yourself too, Macy-chan?" A tear slipped from Macy's cheek onto the doll's face. She brushed it away with one hand. "Yes, I love you, and now you have to hide again, but not under the bed." Carefully, she rewrapped the blanket around the doll, then pulled sheets from the bed and crumpled them around the bundle. Where would the doll be safe? The garage? The Farrells took firewood from that stack every day, but the stack lined one entire wall. There must have been at least 100 pieces piled there. Maybe Miss Tokyo could hide under the far end? She carried the blanket-wrapped doll to the stairway and listened with her entire body. A fresh burst of static told her that Uncle Emery was still working with his radio. She didn't hear Aunt Ida, but time was running out. She could feel minutes rushing past. Quietly, she moved down the stairs. Her chest hurt as she held her breath, trying so hard to hear that she wouldn't let her own breathing make a sound. She was almost to the bottom of the stairs when she heard Aunt Ida humming, the sound coming closer. Macy didn't have to see her to know that Aunt Ida was heading for the stairs with her broom and dustpan. Chapter 30. If you can't go back, go ahead as if you mean it, Macy told herself, repeating one of Mama's favorite sayings. She put a smile on her face and started down the stairs, passing Mrs. Farrell. Bye, Aunt Ida. I'm off to do my part for the war. Hold on, I'm going to let business in. Sorry. Leave your sheets at the bottom of the stairs, Aunt Ida said. She looked more closely at Macy's bundle before adding, Do you want your blanket washed too, dear? The blanket poked out between the sheets. Macy hesitated, thinking fast. No, I promised Mr. Oakes I'd pick up his empty tin cans, and I need it. Of course you do. You'll want to cover the empty cans so they won't blow off, the woman said, her expression clearing. That's thinking ahead, dear. Good for you. Relief swept through Macy. Thank you, Aunt Ida. I have to hurry now. She ran down the rest of the stairs, clutching Miss Tokyo and her bundled blanket as she left the sheets, fearing at every step to be called back. Inside the open garage, she swept her glance around and discovered a folded brown canvas tarp. It was nearly the color of the firewood. She lowered her bundle to the garage floor, whipped open the tarp, and quickly rolled Miss Tokyo from the blanket onto the tarp, taking care to fold the heavy cloth over the doll's head and feet. They'll take in firewood from nearest the door, Macy whispered, and moved down the garage to the end of the wood pile. She lifted several pieces of wood near the end, hoisted Miss Tokyo and the tarp into the hollow she'd made, and carefully placed lengths of wood on top. She stepped back to pick up the blanket and check her work. Anyone looking closely would see the tarp and wonder why it was in there, but people pretty much saw what they expected to see, and the Farrells expected to see a neat stack of firewood. Miss Tokyo is safe. For a while. I'm sorry, Macy told her softly. It can't be pleasant in there, but it's the best I can do for now, Miss T. In her head, the doll's high voice answered, Do not worry, Macy-chan. I know you will come for me. Soon, Macy promised. Soon, I hope. Now I need to get Mr. Oakes' tin cans. Mr. Oakes came outside to help load his big pile of empty cans into the baby buggy. They worked together to fasten the blanket over the cans to keep the wind from blowing them away. Macy thanked him for letting her take them and silently thanked him again for turning her near lie to Aunt Ida into a truth. When do you expect your great-nephew? She asked as they loaded the buggy. Mr. Oakes settled his striped knit cap lower over his ears as if the cold bothered him. The little bells on top jingled, making Macy smile despite herself. Pretty soon, I should think, he answered. Cece's mother says folk here have contacted her, worried about my light spilling out at night. Who had contacted the nephew's mother? Macy wondered. The Farrells? Didn't they know she ran out each evening to check Mr. Oakes' curtains and warn him if light showed? Maybe they did know and meant to spare her. Mr. Oakes turned his grimace into a smile, as if determined to make the best of a difficult situation. Cece will be good company. For you too, I expect. You must be about the same age. He'll be in my class then, and looking for tin cans. She couldn't help glancing at her loaded baby buggy. Maybe I should leave some for him? No, Miss Macy, you take those along. He can wait. I'll be opening twice as many once he gets here with his growing boy's appetite. Macy wanted to say that the boy named Cece would expect more than canned soup, but she didn't dare offer Aunt Ida's homemade bread without asking first. I'd better go then, she said instead, adding quickly, Thank you. As she pushed the buggy over the rough gravel to the highway and alongside it toward town, she wondered about Cece. I hope he's nice. He's sure to be nicer than Christopher Adams. But that wasn't fair. In his own way, Christopher had been nice. Sometimes. Rarely, but sometimes. Why was she even thinking of him? He probably wasn't thinking of her at all. When her nightly check showed light slanting from Mr. Oakes' window again, Macy ran through a light rain and knocked on the door. He opened it, and she pointed past him to a stack of books on the windowsill holding the curtain off-kilter. Mr. Oaks shook his head. I get distracted and set them down wherever I happen to be. Many thanks for noticing, Miss Macy. When he walked over to the window to straighten the curtain, Macy leaned curiously into the room. You sure have a lot of books. My great pleasure and biggest fault, he said, smiling. I often catch the Greyhound bus up on the highway and ride to our county seat at Tillamook to browse through bookstores. He turned to a table and picked up a book with a glossy cover. I found this one for you. You mentioned enjoying your mother's books of pictures from Japan. Maybe you'll like this. He held out the book with a cloud of cherry blossoms on the cover. Macy felt her mouth shape a silent, oh. Inside, picture after picture showed shrines, temples, and masses of blossoming trees. Thank you. She closed the book. She clasped the book close. I can almost feel Mama looking through it with me. It's my thanks to you, he said, for keeping an eye on my blackout problem. She looked through the book again, but clapped it shut with a sudden awful thought. I won't be able to keep it. The Farrells hate Japanese things. Keep the book here, then, he said. My porch is usually sheltered from the rain. You're welcome to sit out there and look through your book anytime you like. She felt as if a blackout curtain couldn't dim her smile as she thanked him again and handed the book for safekeeping. Happiness stayed with her all the way home to her chores. The Farrells had agreed to set a daily time limit to clearing the garden and rolling bandages. Once her work was finished, Macy was free to do as she wished until supper and homework. Of course, she was not to venture near the beach by herself, since the enemy might invade at any time, according to Uncle Emery. Aunt Ida hesitated when Macy explained that Mr. Oaks had invited her to read books from his collection, but as long as Macy promised to remain on the porch, she agreed. Uncle Emery said he was relieved to learn that the many trips Mr. Oak made on the Greyhound bus were to explore bookstores and not to meet with a group of spies, as some people feared. Macy almost smiled at that, thinking what Papa might say about Uncle Emery's fears. Still, she heard the war reports on the shortwave radio. The war was terrible. Maybe she should take those fears seriously. What would Hap think of her enjoying pictures of beautiful places in Japan? The question came suddenly. Hap had died because of enemy soldiers from the land of beautiful shrines and blossoming trees. Angry people make the most noise, she said softly. Nobody hears from the gentle people who live there, too. People like the doll maker who made Miss Tokyo. Hap loved Miss Tokyo. He would understand. Her corner on Mr. Oaks's porch was comfortably out of the rain, so often streaming from the eaves. She nestled in a big rattan chair on a cushion Mr. Oaks kept dry in his cabin until she came for it. While she listened to the rain, she imagined herself walking through a tunnel of blossoming cherry trees. She was careful not to imagine falling bombs or the sounds of rifles among those trees. She carried her journal in her pocket and wrote short notes from her cozy corner. The Farrells' woodpile grew smaller near the back door. The pot-belly stove in the front room took a steady supply, but there was still a safe amount between the kitchen and Miss Tokyo. Macy, Aunt Ida said after only a week of afternoon free time spent on Mr. Oaks's front porch, it's too wet to work in the garden, but before you leave today, please bring in an armload of firewood. Right away, Aunt Ida. Macy pulled on her coat and started for the garage. Aunt Ida called after her, Take wood from the far end this time, dear. Uncle Emery will be ordering another load next week. We may as well begin clearing space for it at the back. Macy was glad she was turned away so Aunt Ida wouldn't see the shock on her face. Miss Tokyo had to be moved. She had to be moved now. All right, that's the end of the chapter. Stay tuned tomorrow for 2 more. We're getting close. Just this much more. See you guys. Bye.